but something nudged him to pick it up. "Hello, this is Cale Vance speaking." First, silence. He was about to hang up when he heard it. A loud, heart-wrenching cry of a child. Now, the story in full. The sun beat harshly on the corrugated iron roof of a small one-room apartment in the Barrio Este neighborhood of San Lorenzo. The air inside was stifling, thick with the smell of cheap cooking oil from the small hot plate in the corner. A pot of thin oatmeal simmered gently, the only meal she could afford to prepare for her 2-year-old twins that afternoon. Her children, Mateo and Sofia, played on the frayed woven mat by the bed. Their giggles, though innocent, carried a raw hunger, both for food and for the warmth of a life their mother struggled daily to provide. Elena stirred the pot slowly, her arms trembling. She had been feeling faint for days, her chest tightening every now and then, but she pushed on. "I must not give up." "Not for them," she whispered, glancing lovingly at her children. But as she turned to remove the pot from the heat, a sudden pain, sharp and crushing, shot through her chest. She gasped, clutching her heart, her knees buckling beneath her. "Mommy!" Mateo's little voice rang out, confused. Elena staggered toward the bed, but collapsed hard onto the cold concrete floor before she could reach it. Her body went still, her breath shallow. The twins froze. Then Sofia let out a piercing scream. "Mommy, Mommy!" Mateo crawled quickly to her side, tugging at her dress. "Mommy, wake up! Wake up!" His babyish pronunciation broke into sobs, but Elena did not move. The children cried louder, their wails filling the room. Sofia, in her panic, spotted the battered flip phone lying on the crate beside the bed. She grabbed it with her tiny hands, pressing the buttons at random. The phone came alive, dialing a number. Neither child knew what they had done, but fate had already decided someone, somewhere, would hear their cry. On the other side of the city, in a towering glass building in the bustling financial district of Norte Centro, Cale Vance sat behind his wide mahogany desk. He was 36, a billionaire CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing tech companies. The office around him buzzed with activity, his executives rushing to and fro with files, laptops, and reports. But Cale's mind was far away. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. To the world, he was a man who had everything: wealth, power, respect. Yet in the quiet of his heart, there was an emptiness money could not fill. He lived alone in his penthouse, his days swallowed by endless meetings and boardroom battles. Just as he closed his eyes for a brief moment of rest, his phone rang. The screen flashed an unknown number. Cale frowned. "Another spam call," he muttered, but something nudged him to pick it up. "Hello, this is Cale Vance speaking." First, silence. He was about to hang up when he heard it. A loud, heart-wrenching cry of a child. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up!" Cale sat upright, his hand tightening on the phone. "What? Who is this? Hello? Can you hear me?" Through the receiver came more cries. Another tiny voice, broken and desperate, spoke between sobs. "Mommy, fall down. Mommy, no. Stand up. Help." Cale's heart pounded. He turned in his chair, gripping the phone tighter. "Child, listen. I need you to tell me where you are." "Okay, where are you? Can you tell me?" But the only response was crying, the sharp, helpless wails of children who could not explain. In the background, he heard the faint static hum of a small radio, the clatter of something falling to the floor, and muffled sobs echoing in a small room. Cale rose to his feet immediately, depressing the intercom. "Maria, get the IT team here. Now." Within moments, his personal assistant rushed in. "Yes, sir. I just received a call from children." "Something's wrong. Trace the call location. Fast." Maria blinked in shock but nodded, dialing the internal team. Minutes later, a voice came through the speaker. "Sir, we've traced the number. It's coming from Barrio Este, a small building on Calle Sol." Cale grabbed his car keys without hesitation. "Call emergency services, ambulance, police, everyone. I'm heading there now." Maria stammered. "Sir, should you?" But Cale was already striding out of the office, his voice firm. "If I don't go, those children may lose their mother tonight." The elevator doors slid open with a sharp ding and Cale stormed out, his long strides echoing through the marble-floored lobby of the Vance Tech headquarters. His driver, Carlos, already stood waiting by the sleek black SUV, puzzled by his boss's sudden urgency. "Carlos, start the engine. We're going to Barrio Este." "Fast," Cale ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "Yes, sir," Carlos replied, rushing to open the door. As the car roared to life, Cale dialed emergency services. "This is Cale Vance. I just received a distress call from children in Barrio Este. Their mother has collapsed. Send an ambulance to Calle Sol immediately. I'll meet you there." The dispatcher on the other end hesitated at first, but Cale's voice was commanding, brooking no delay. "We're dispatching now, sir." Cale ended the call and sat forward, his jaw clenched. His mind kept replaying the tiny voices. Broken, terrified, pleading. "Mommy, fall down. Help." He ran his hand across his forehead. "What if I'm too late? What if those children lose her before we arrive?" The car weaved through the city traffic, honking and swerving past buses and motorcycles. The city was alive with chaos, street vendors calling out their wares, the usual urban noise. But inside the SUV, silence reigned except for the pounding of Cale's heart. "Sir," Carlos finally asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. "What exactly happened?" Cale's eyes were fixed out the window. "Two children, maybe twins. They called me by mistake. I heard them crying over their mother. She collapsed. They can't explain where they are, but my team traced the number. If we don't get there in time, she could." He stopped, his voice breaking slightly. Carlos swallowed hard. "God forbid, sir." "We'll get there." Minutes felt like hours. The SUV sped past the river, the cityscape shifting from polished skyscrapers to the crowded, bustling streets of Barrio Este. Finally, they turned into a narrow lane where small buildings stood packed tightly together. By then, an ambulance was already parked outside a faded blue building. Neighbors had gathered, murmuring anxiously, pointing toward one of the rooms. Cale jumped out before the car fully stopped, his expensive shoes splashing into muddy puddles without a second thought. He pushed through the crowd. "Where is she? Where are the children?" he demanded. A woman carrying a baby pointed toward a door. "Inside that room, sir. The children have been crying since the mother, she hasn't moved." Cale's heart clenched as he rushed toward the open doorway. Inside, the room was dim and cramped. On the concrete floor lay a woman, unconscious, her dress twisted, her face pale and damp with sweat. Two tiny toddlers clung to her, their little faces streaked with tears. One of them, Sophia, still held the flip phone in her tiny hand, her sobs filling the air. Her brother, Mateo, tugged weakly at his mother's dress, his voice hoarse from crying. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up." Cale's throat tightened. He had seen many things in his life, but never this, innocence pleading against death. "Over here," he called out to the paramedics. They rushed in with a stretcher, checking Elena's pulse. "She's still breathing, weak but alive. We need to move her now." As they lifted her, Sophia wailed louder, refusing to let go. Cale bent down gently, scooping both children into his arms. They clung to him, their tiny fists gripping his shirt as though sensing he was their only hope. "It's okay," Cale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You did well, both of you. You saved your mommy. The children buried their wet faces against his chest as he carried them out into the evening air. The ambulance doors slammed shut, its siren blaring as it tore through the narrow streets toward San Lorenzo General Hospital. Inside, Elena lay on the stretcher, an oxygen mask fitted over her face, her pulse faint but steady. Behind the ambulance, Cale's SUV followed closely. He sat in the back seat with the twins still clinging to him, their tiny bodies trembling, their cheeks wet with tears. "Shoo, it's okay," Cale whispered, rocking them gently, his voice soft in a way even he did not recognize. "Your mommy is going to be fine. We'll make sure she's fine." But deep inside, his chest tightened. He had no guarantee she would live. He didn't even know this woman's name. Yet the thought of those children losing her filled him with a fear he couldn't explain. When they arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed Elena into the emergency ward. Cale tried to follow, but a stern nurse blocked his way. "Sir, only medical staff beyond this point." "I'll cover all her bills," Cale said quickly, his voice urgent. Just save her." The nurse blinked at him, surprised by his tone, then nodded before hurrying away. Left in the waiting area, Cale lowered himself onto a plastic chair, the twins still in his arms. They had quieted now, their exhausted sobs reduced to hiccups. Sophia clutched his tie tightly while Mateo's little head rested against his chest. A curious nurse passing by stopped. "Sir, are those your children?" Cale glanced at them, their small hands gripping him as though they had known him all their lives. Something stirred inside him. He swallowed hard. "No. But maybe tonight, something wanted them to call me." The nurse gave him a puzzled look but said nothing, moving on. Minutes turned into hours. The white walls of the waiting room, the faint smell of disinfectant, the occasional cries of other patients. All blurred around Cale. He couldn't take his eyes off the door that led to the emergency ward. Finally, a doctor emerged, removing his gloves. Cale stood immediately, heart pounding. "How is she?" "She's stable for now," the doctor said. "She suffered a cardiac episode. Very dangerous, but luckily help arrived on time. Another 10-15 minutes, and she might not have survived." Cale exhaled, his shoulders sagging in relief. He looked down at the children, still clutching him, and whispered, "You did it. You truly saved her." The doctor's gaze softened. "Are you family?" Cale hesitated. "No, not really. But I'll take responsibility for her care." The doctor nodded. "She'll be transferred to the ward shortly. You can see her once she's awake." As the doctor left, Cale sat back down, the weight of the moment pressing deeply into him. He glanced at the twins, now asleep in his arms, their innocent faces peaceful despite the storm of the night. For the first time in many years, Cale felt something stir in him, something stronger than business, stronger than wealth. It was the feeling of being needed, and he knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning. The ward was dimly lit, filled with the faint hum of medical machines. A soft breeze slipped in through the half-open window, stirring the white curtains. Elena lay on the hospital bed, her body weak, her skin pale, but her chest rising steadily with each breath. Beside her, on two plastic chairs pushed together, Mateo and Sophia slept curled against Cale's arms. Their little fists clutched his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Cale hadn't moved for hours, his eyes fixed on the woman lying unconscious before him. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt as though the lives of these three strangers had suddenly entwined with his. At dawn, a faint murmur broke the silence. My babies." Cale straightened instantly, leaning forward. Elena's eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze. She turned her head slowly, her weak eyes finding the sleeping twins. "Mateo." "Sophia," her voice cracked, barely audible. "They're fine," Cale said quickly, his voice gentle but steady. They cried for help, and help came. Her eyes darted to him for the first time, weary and questioning. Who are you? Cale hesitated, then offered a small smile. The man your children called by mistake. Elena's brows furrowed, her lips trembling. She tried to sit up, but pain gripped her chest. Cale leaned forward immediately. Don't move. The doctors said you need rest. You're safe now. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the twins again. Her whisper cracked with emotion. They saved me. Yes, Cale said softly, glancing down at the children. Your little girl pressed my number. She cried into the phone until I came. If not for them, his voice trailed off, thick with unspoken words. Elena covered her face with her trembling hand, sobbing quietly. Dios mío, you used my babies, my little ones. Cale looked at her with a mix of admiration and sadness. She was frail, clearly exhausted by life's weight. Yet, her first thought was gratitude. After a moment, she lowered her hand and looked at him again. Why would you come? You don't even know us. Cale met her eyes steadily. I couldn't ignore them. Not when I heard their cries. Some things you don't question, you just do. Silence lingered between them, broken only by the soft breathing of the twins. For the first time, Elena noticed how tenderly they clung to him, how safe they looked in his arms, as though he had been theirs all along. Her lips trembled. Thank you for not ignoring them, for not ignoring me. Cale shook his head. Don't thank me. Thank these two heroes. He brushed a strand of Sophia's hair away from her face. The twins stirred, blinking awake. Matteo rubbed his eyes, then gasped when he saw his mother sitting up slightly. Mommy, he cried, scrambling onto the bed. Sophia followed, her tiny arms wrapping around Elena's waist. Mommy, no stand up yesterday, Sophia said, her words slurred but clear. Mommy sleep on floor. Elena burst into fresh tears, hugging them tightly. My angels, my little heroes. Cale rose quietly, giving them their moment. But his heart swelled at the sight. It was the purest picture of love he had ever seen, fragile, desperate, yet powerful enough to defy death. As he turned toward the door, Elena called after him weakly. Wait, sir, please. What did you say your name was? Cale paused, meeting her gaze. Cale. Cale Vance. For a long second, their eyes held, hers filled with gratitude, his with something deeper he couldn't yet name. And in that quiet hospital ward, both felt it. Destiny had walked in uninvited. The days after Elena's collapse passed slowly, stitched together with hospital visits, whispered prayers, and the restless energy of two toddlers. For Elena, the gratitude of being alive mingled with the fear of what lay ahead. The doctors had warned her gently. You need rest, Senora. Stress and poor nutrition triggered the cardiac episode. If you push yourself further, you may not survive the next one. Rest. Nutrition. Elena almost laughed at the words. How could a widow struggling daily to feed her children in a one-room apartment find rest? Yet every day since that terrifying night, Cale Vance returned. First she thought it was pity, a rich man touched by the cries of children, doing his charity. But soon she realized it was more. He came not with cameras or bodyguards, but with quiet persistence. A thermos of soup one day, fresh clothes for the twins another, a soft toy that made Sophia laugh so hard she hiccuped. He would kneel on the hospital floor to play catch with Matteo using a rubber ball, his laughter echoing through the ward, drawing smiles even from the nurses. When Elena asked him once, her voice weary, why do you keep coming back, he had simply smiled. Because they called me, and I answered. Maybe I was meant to. One afternoon, while Elena dozed lightly, she woke to the sound of giggles. She turned her head and froze. There was Cale, sitting cross-legged on the floor in his expensive shirt and trousers, letting Sophia braid his tie into messy knots while Matteo climbed onto his lap. "Cale, you'll spoil your clothes," Elena exclaimed, half scolding, half surprised. He looked up at her, grinning. "They're only clothes. They're not as important as smiles." Her heart stuttered at the sincerity in his voice. She quickly looked away, afraid of what her face might reveal. But not everyone understood. The nurses whispered when they saw him. "Every day that man comes. Do you know who he is? They say he's a billionaire. What's he doing with a poor widow like her?" Elena heard them. And though she tried to steel her heart, a quiet warmth bloomed inside her whenever Cale walked in. Still, she reminded herself, don't be deceived. Men like him don't stay. Men like him don't build homes with women like me. That night, when he offered to settle the hospital bill, she shook her head stubbornly. "No, I don't want charity. I can't repay you." Cale studied her for a moment, then said softly, "Who said you need to repay me?" "Elena, sometimes helping isn't charity. It's purpose." The way he said her name made her chest tighten. She looked away, unable to respond. Yet despite her resistance, despite her fears, she could not deny one truth. Her children were already attached to him. "Mommy," Matteo said one evening as he drifted to sleep beside her. "Uncle Cale will come tomorrow." Elena hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, my son. He will come." And she knew, whether she liked it or not, this man was weaving himself into the fabric of their lives. Destiny was pulling, and she was too tired to fight.